As someone who's slowly reaching the finish line of his own dissertation, I am super happy to see someone that has made it to the end. So Dr. Andy Murray recently received his PhD in sociology from the University of California, Santa Cruz. His dissertation was an ethnographic account of the Open Insulin Project and its place in a broader network of amateur, DIY, and community biology and biotechnology. He remains a member of the Open Insulin Project and co-organized this panel with his collaborators in the project's Open Insulin in Society Working Group. His research interests are at the intersection of emergent biotechnology, biomedicine, and ethics. So without further ado, I pass the floor to Andy.
Oh, thank you so much. And it is really weird being there, especially right now, where it's just like, oh, you're done. And then you're just done. And yeah, there it is. So let me see if I can start this. And thank you everyone for the congratulations. And someone asked me for a link. I'll see if I have one. I'm not sure I do. Probably. Okay. Can you all can see my this who we are slide? Somebody's gonna have to let me know verbally probably because my display is all different now.
I can only see your face actually.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Can you
Let's try
share
one more
screen?
time. Let's see what we can do. I got this. I'm sorry, I'm clearly not the most tech savvy, especially with the multiple screens and the share screen option, so give me just 1 second. All right, here we go. How's that?
Awesome.
Good? I see a thumbs up. Okay, good. I can see more now too, which is also very helpful. All right, so, I've been introduced graciously by Yangbi so far, but the people that contributed to this go well beyond me. So I'm kind of the point person and one of the co-founders of a working group within the Open Insulin Project, or Open Insulin Foundation, actually, I think, called Open Insulin in Society. And this was sort of born out of a bunch of initially primary social science, theories, perspectives, concerns.
Hey, Andy, we're having difficulty hearing you.
Oh, I'm very sorry. Let me try to cut my video for a second.
It's more of a volume issue right now for me.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's just more to do with where your speaker is. Like it jostled at some point when you're moving.
Is that any better? Any better?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, that's better. The headset I was using may not work particularly well. Okay, so repeating, I'm a point person for Open Insulin Society working group within the Open Insulin Project. Here are some of our other members I just want to give their due. Maria Chavez, who I think is on this call, Anthony DeFranco, I think Dan Santos is on this call, so a number of us are here. I'm the one responsible for talking. But you can see it's a range of people from sociology to anthropology to geography. We have natural science PhDs as well, a few, and some sort of generally interested folks. But this is who we are. And so we just want to have a conversation that is along the lines of some of the things that we talk about in relation to the Open Insulin Project and to community bio more broadly. So as the BioSummits have progressed, this is my third BioSummit. So I was at BioSummit 2.0, 3.0, and now 4.0. They've covered different themes. My understanding of the first one, which I was not at, but my understanding of it is that it answered this question: is community bio a movement? And then the second question sort of took a step further and said, okay, well, if community bio is a movement, who's part of this movement? What are this movement's aims, and how does it strive toward them? And the product of this was the statement of shared purpose. And then 3.0 moved a step further and said, okay, what are the shared ethics as these people pursue these aims? And now this fourth BioSummit is beginning to think about questions of governance. So how should this movement be governed? So, part of this is my interpretation of what's happened at past BioSummit. So they've answered these questions that they've asked, 2.0 and 3.0 in particular, in odd and inclusive fashions. So when you all registered for the event, you had to agree with a few things, right? 3 things, I think: the code of conduct, the statement of shared purpose, and then the community ethics document. So, the latter of these are the results from the 2 previous summits, which you can see here. And you'll note just that they're very accommodating, right? So very broadly phrased. Partially the result. I was pretty involved with creating, and Alex Perlman led the activities, who I think is here right now, last year to create it. Takes the form of a list of questions, and the answers to which would
Uh-oh, did we lose him?
Hi, Andy.
He's back.
You did, briefly.
Boom.
I'm back.
Wonderful.
Let me stop my video because that's probably part of the problem.
I'll say for the moment,
All right.
I recommend everybody
Are we
put
back?
in whatever they've got, so because it takes more cycles with all the video.
Are we okay?
I think we
Yes.
Okay, so maybe that extra 15 minutes is good then. Okay, so now as BioSummit is, we're moving on to these questions of governance, especially in this track. There are some important questions to address about the accommodating nature of this movement. So I think something that is very recent, but also recurring within community bio, that is interesting to think about these sorts of questions with, right? It's not that I want to have a discussion about these things exclusively, it's that I want to use these things as a case for thinking about these broader sorts of governance questions within community bio. And this case is these controversies surrounding experimentation, including these recent experimental COVID-19 vaccines, which I know Alex has wrote a piece about these as well. So the story on the left is published in the New York Times, and this was a big talking point around BioSummit 2.0. It came out in, I think, May of 2018. As the community is involved with asserting a common identity and a shared purpose, there's this controversial story that's published that community bio cases. And then now this year, this story is one of sort of a flurry of stories that have come out, and articles and opinion pieces about that are reporting and often criticizing how some participants in community bio are participating in efforts to develop DIY. Not that I'm trying to conflate DIY and community bio. There are differences, but they do overlap. These efforts to develop DIY COVID-19 vaccines, while some people are arguing that these efforts run counter to the ethos of community bio and open science, that they're relatively elitist projects or something similar. So this is just to say that self-experimentation and experimental treatments continue to be an area where the apparent, inclusivity, harmony of community bio and its cohesiveness give way to some apparent and important value disagreements that continue to persist within the movement. So what we want to do is just have a conversation about these sorts of questions, and it's specifically because, sorry, went forward a second. We don't have enough opportunities, I think, to hear from those of you who are working in and coming from other places, and from people who are coming from really different contexts, and working on all sorts of different projects. So we're especially interested in the second question, but our questions are, as community bio moves toward developing governance strategies, what challenges do the different values and goals within a broad movement create? And then, especially from your own vantage and experience within community bio, can you speak to some of these challenges and how you have addressed them? So we, as the Open Insulin and Society group, we are familiar with our own project and the ways in which these manifest sometimes. But we would love to hear about your experiences from wherever you are coming from within the movement. And that's what I have, is a prompt for a collective discussion.
Awesome, Andy. So we'll use the same format we did last time, which is essentially if you, use the clapping hands reaction, then we'll get to you and we'll unmute you and you can put in your piece there. So Isis in the chat seemed to have brought up a really interesting point, which I think is kind of what the discussion questions are about. How do we handle value disagreements inside the DIY community? And what are the challenges? I think that's a really good question. And I think it really dovetails nicely with this question of, as people kind of engage in self-experimentation or other activities, there are individuals within the community that are very for it. There are individuals in the community that are very against it. And maybe one of the things I might propose right off the bat is there's an element of how people wish to be perceived, that exists strongly within the community. And I think how they wish to be perceived can then influence the types of actions that they take. So for example, I've noticed, so my dissertation is on community labs. And along the kind of spectrum of self-experimentation, kind of like, doing that type of stuff versus community lab settings, I feel like the community lab settings in general tend to be a bit more conservative. There's very much a feeling within community labs from my observations, and I would love for community lab input about how horribly wrong I am. But there's this desire to be taken both seriously and be considered a safe and positive resource in the communities that they're based in. And so that in turn, those kinds of values and motivations then influence the kinds of activities that they are willing and not willing to engage in. So that's kind of like, I'm going to just throw that out there.
If this, I think this is a really good point. If this is the case within things that identify as community labs, what other sorts of participants in the community biosphere have you encountered that don't adapt that attitude, wanting to be seen as a positive resource and maybe espouse present themselves to the world and to community biology differently?
Is that to me or is that to the group?
Sorry. Well, I'm glad you can hear me now with the new headset, so that's
yes.
Good. Good.
I feel like you could answer too, Youngbi. I'm interested in your thoughts too.
Yeah.
You've been a pretty quiet moderator, so
I just, I'm that social science person that's like, I don't want to like influence everybody around me. So, but the way that I've observed it, and I think that what, for example, was said in the chat by, I assume it might be Dan, it might be someone just from the Biodesign Challenge. I completely agree. it's like how David always talks about, participants in this community being like pirate ships, right? Like, everybody kind of does their own thing. And, the elements that I think of, part of it is a view of scope. So community labs clearly advertise themselves as being based within their communities, right? So there's this element of like community togetherness, community building, being entrenched and being a part of the community as a force of good or as a force of positive change. While, there are individuals who I think, and there's nothing necessarily, malevolent to say about them per se, but I would put out there that there are individuals that their scope doesn't go towards a community so much as it goes towards maybe like a smaller group or an individual kind of, like an individual kind of basis, right? So as long as my actions harm no one else, and I as an individual fully decide to take on the risks, and of course, Alex is here, we could all have a discussion about informed risk and understanding risk. I think that there are individuals certainly that feel like they understand the risks and are willing to accept the risks on their own individual behalf. The line starts, of course, getting blurry when you have individuals that experiment for their own ends and their own desires, but then put their actions out for others. Like, I think that's where things start getting a little bit blurry. And I'm done.
So does anyone have any
Well,
thoughts?
I actually have a clarification question. When you say put their actions out for others, I'm just wondering what you mean by that.
So the intersectionality of the community is predominantly built on this idea of freedom and access, right? So the idea that individuals should have the freedom and the opportunities to do, it's very Wiccan is somewhat the way that I kind of feel it is, as long as ye harm none, do as ye will. And my background, for people that don't know me, my background is really much more government and academia. So I predominantly exist in the biosecurity and biosafety realm, although I have been a semi-active member of the community lab scene for 4 or 5 years at this point. And so it's just a very interesting perspective to have when there are individuals that, it's the intersectionality of people doing things. And I'm perfectly fine if they feel like they understand the risks that they just, they decide to take it upon themselves. But I'm trying to dance around. I'm trying to dance around specific people, but just, the active encouragement of naive or amateur populations who don't necessarily understand all of the kind of tacit knowledge that goes into a lot of the kind of workings of biology, who don't understand the risks by nature of being an amateur, I find incredibly problematic.
So I noticed that Alex has brought up a few interesting questions. Looks like some people are responding to it.
I would love to hear it. Andres, can you tell us more? You were the first one to respond to one of my questions in the chat about, this is a kind of US centric phenomenon, or is it going on in other countries? Because I actually don't know the answer to that.
Hi, Andres. Oh.
Andreas? Here's something.
He put in the chat there's a microphone problem, so he's working
Yep.
it.
Yeah.
Should we, so ISIS also will come. Andres?
Hey, Ola, okay. So Ola was, I think his mic was hot. Andres, do you want to unmute your mic if you fix the problem and provide us some much needed insights?
I think Isis was also bringing up an interesting point. She's also not in the US. Maybe while we wait for Andres, Isis can jump in.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Can folks unmute themselves at this point?
I'm able to.
Okay, thank you, Jessica.
Oh, I'm not sure if ISIS is around. Well, maybe we can move on. I know
Yeah.
you have a lot of thoughts here, Alex. Do you want to expand on them?
I mean, frankly, I would love to hear from someone who's not
You.
US and also who has not written about this extensively. I think everyone has heard my thoughts. But Jessica is able to unmute herself, and this is a group conversation. So if
Okay.
Jessica, if you feel comfortable, and if you maybe had a thought, or if anyone else wants to jump in.
Yeah, I only joined like 5 minutes ago, so I'm not really up on what the conversation is. I'm also working full time today, so I've just been dropping in and out here and there. So no thoughts yet because I haven't been part of the conversation long enough.
Well, let me pose a question, and this hopefully will help with the kind of global element as well. So Open Insulin is kind of unique in that it's a global venture between, multiple players in, across the globe. And, it would be really interesting to hear from the Open Insulin people themselves about, have there been these particular kinds of issues that have come up from different geographic regions or kind of different regional values or expertise type issues?
So I can, I know I just joined this discussion, but I can say we had an internship program. So I'm part of Open Insulin. And we had an internship program for the first time that we launched very quickly. Maria managed to put it together over the course of, I think, 2 weeks. We went from idea to actually enrolling and getting applications. And we had 2 people who were global. Most of them were US based across the whole country. We had one in Greece and one in Cameroon. And I know specifically with the person in Cameroon, there was a lot of technical difficulties in getting them to communicate with us in an effective way. There was a lot of just, connectivity issues, and timing, I think, was another big one, because it's a difficult thing to be on the West Coast and coordinate with people in Africa because you're very far apart in time zones. So to make that work just logistically was very challenging. But that person wasn't specifically in my mentor group, so I don't have beyond the general insights anymore than that.
Oh yeah, they both were actually in my group. This is Anthony here from Open Insulin. And yeah, that's a pretty accurate assessment of it. There were just like logistical issues and to some extent language issues. So that was, I would say that's kind of more of like a just collaboration level thing than a governance level thing. But it did have an indirect impact because one of our goals is to have the governance be based in the people working on the project and the primary stakeholders in the work of the project, which is the people who would use the insulin that we would make. And just seeing these practical difficulties in communicating and collaborating does seem to kind of endanger that goal. And also, a little more specifically, I was running the hardware, open hardware group, and there's a lot of potential for collaboration between people in our working directly in our collaboration to develop open hardware and for example, Africa OSH, which the intern in question from Cameroon was a part of as well. So one of our hopes was that by his participating in our internship program, we could use that as a basis to build closer ties between our two groups. But because we were just struggling with practical coordination and collaboration issues, we did do an okay job of doing what was in the internship, but we couldn't really seriously think of going beyond that. So I think it kind of brings us back to another principle of open insulin, which is to have a bunch of semi-autonomous groups that can do a lot locally, but also can pool resources and collaborate where that's appropriate. So I think that's like a concept that is kind of stressed by the issues that we noticed there.
No, I love that feedback, Anthony. Thank you so much, and Jessica as well. What's really interesting, I'm just going to kind of go with it, is what's interesting about Open Insulin is it's a project that has both very real kind of public health dimensions. It also has kind of like pharmaceutical, big business dimensions. It also has political and political dimensions as well. And so, there are various ways that Open Insulin could have gone about doing what it did or what it's trying to do. But from what I recall, Open Insulin has deliberately been using researching and using like interns and lawyers and internal resources to try to find governance methods that align with a fully legal and fully realizable pathway, as opposed to kind of just disrupting the system for the sake of disrupting the system. And kind of, it would be really interesting to, if no one is kind of in the mood to have a conversation, it would be kind of interesting to hear like the Open Insulin group feedback about how they kind of arrived at that methodology of administration and governance approaches, as opposed to maybe like other methodologies.
Well, Jess actually was running the regulatory internship group and also the working group that grew out of that. So I would definitely solicit her responses, but I might also say I think a lot of the earlier on in the project, we just got a sense that there were structural issues in the insulin crisis, and we should use kind of the opposite approach questions of governance from the opposite angles that they're approached from in like the corporate and academic institutional worlds. So that aligned a lot with hacker culture in general, and to a large extent, like how those ideas play out in biohacking spaces more specifically. But I also think that there is attention there because the biotech world is a lot more dominated by, I think, corporate and academic institutional actors. And if you want to actually give medicine to people to use, there's a really complex regulatory system that you almost certainly have to deal with. You know, we are looking into ways that you might not have to do that in a really burdensome way, but regardless of that, there are really fundamental questions of safety, for instance, that have to be addressed one way or another. So I think because of that, we, you know, because our goal is ultimately to give people medicine, and the world around us treats the act of providing medicine to people to use in a certain way, where it's subjected to a lot of scrutiny, it seemed and still seems so far most practical to kind of work within the existing system to the extent it's feasible, and to, you know, not just like defy it, but rather seek to change it if the way the existing system works is not adequate to you know, serving people's needs in the just like providing people with medicine that is safe, but also, you know, not holding back medicine such that, you know, lives would be lost because of lack of access, you know, striking the right balance there.
Yeah, and regarding the safety, so there's been a number of really important changes regulating insulin in the US just in the past few months. So you no longer are required to do clinical insulin to prove that it's equivalent to an insulin already on the market. So you do that through a number of chemical studies. We would have to do animal toxicity studies and other very basic safety requirements, or not so basic, depending on your resourcing. And because of that, insulin is a really unique, has a really unique opportunity to make it to market as a community biology project in the way that some of the other drugs are going to have a lot harder time, and that hopefully we can start to set up some of the infrastructure around how you do that, because we don't have to go through a lot of the regulatory processes that you would for a brand new drug. So yeah, we are a little bit lucky in that sense. But again, that's only happened over the past couple months. And we've recently had someone who was a legislative aide join us who was actually instrumental in writing those regulations. So I think we're in a really unique position to make a huge difference.
No, that's awesome. So I'm gonna slightly change my tact. I feel like I would love to hear more voices. So I'm gonna kind of go for an impressions question, because this whole entire morning, a lot of the discussion was about governance. You know, Marshall Gans gave a really inspiring talk about governance and individual self-assembly. And I would just really love to hear, you know, the impressions that people had as they were hearing, you know, Marshall Gans talk about governance and what their general kind of impressions were. You know, was it like, yeah, we totally need governance, or, you know, we're doing fine just now, like I'm perfectly content, or you know, is it all bunk? Like, I would just love to hear people's feedback, because I think that way we can kind of get to, as people, you know, how people perceive governance and how those different values then may, you know, help, or, you know, create different avenues for the way that this group wishes to, you know, find a governance mechanism.
Can I say something?
Yeah, Ola, what's up?
Yeah, I'm fine. You know, I just join and try to understand what you've been talking about. But since you made mention about Marshall Gans, and during that discussion, one thing really, you know, reflected, and that was commitment, getting people to commit to work with you. You know, maybe from this part of the world where I come from and from my own exposure, you know, that word governance it's quite complex for me to comprehend, to tell you, okay, how do we govern or how to arrange ourselves? But one thing I've learned from the fellowship program is that people can have different values, but there's a way we can derive shared values. And if you are fortunate enough to meet people, because sometimes people you want to work with, if they believe in what you want to do, there's the community bio movement. Like here in Nigeria, if I'm going to start anything or think about the community bio movement here, it's a new word. But when you start and you're fortunate to meet people that share the same values with you, I think there are a lot of ways in which we can, you know, bring people together. We can bring a lot of people together. People want to learn. It's new information. A lot of people don't have direction on what to do after school. A lot of K1, K2, K10, K11, K12 students are looking for a way to understand what they will do in the university. A lot of undergraduates are trying to find. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. So if there's a way we can gather people and we can structure it and get results done. I don't know, maybe I'm communicating. I'm not sure I'm communicating with you guys. Yeah.
No, so some of it, it sounded like, you know, you were talking about commitment, right? So Marshall Gans really emphasized commitment. And that's definitely, you know, been a really interesting beast watching, you know, us trying to construct an airplane while it's flying, like the Global Bio Summit 4.0. That commitment element is incredibly important. And trying to find ways to, you know, I thought Marshall was very blunt when he said, if people commit, then they should be committed, right? Like, you know, it can't just kind of be, oh, I'm a little too busy, or, you know, this is just kind of a side gig. Like once you're in, you're in. You know, this is Fight Club, except you know, we actually talk about Fight Club rather than rule number 1 of Fight Club, which is no one talks about Fight Club. So no, that's a really good point. You know, like getting that commitment, and part of that probably is also related to how well aligned people's values are with the values of the group or the organization that they're joining, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm saying. If you're fortunate to meet people that you share the same values with, and they see the big picture, I think with that commitment, you know, you could also galvanize and organize a lot of other people to achieve the shared purpose. Mm-hmm. So that's really good. Yeah. Commitment is really important.
So to kind of take that conversation further with like the group, what would be really interesting is, you know, when the group was small, when, you know, community labs, everybody knew each other, or DIY bio practitioners, everyone knew each other. It was easy enough because there were core values that everybody kind of shared, or core interests, but we're kind of approaching this critical mass where, you know, individuals want to do different things that not necessarily everybody wants to participate in. So are there methodologies that, you know, maybe exist that, you know, we could maybe leverage to help address those kinds of like divergent values? Is it about finding those core values and really capitalizing on those and building a structure from them? What are kind of like the options that we have?
So I think this is certainly close to the sort of things I was envisioning this group talking about. But one of the things that I tend to think about this community is that this search for core values, because community bio is already casting such a wide net and trying to include a broad range of people, which I think is a good thing, when you bring a broad group of people together and then you say, okay, we need to identify our core values, what happens is that you get these incredibly commodious core values that can, can like bring everybody under the tent or keep everybody under the tent that you've gathered. And I think that those core values, by focusing on those core values, what happens is that you actually get people who have different practical values that manifest in different practical ways at their specific work sites, under the guise of having people who have common values. And I think in moments like self-experimentation and a reluctance, like you said earlier, to talk about the specifics of what's going on in the community and what those specific disagreements are, that there's a tendency to keep that sort of snowball going down the hill of gathering more and more people under vague, similarities in what they're doing, when in reality, like, this work looks dramatically different in different contexts. Even down to, so, Anthony's example earlier about open insulin and, open insulin trying to provide an alternative to the ways that the science works in government or in academia and industry are the ones that he talked about. But even in different international contexts, open insulin's collaborations with industry and with government and academia have taken different forms because they have to, because the contexts are so dramatically different, and the kinds of science to which open insulin is trying to provide an alternative are so different. And, some of the fundamental questions I have are about the sustainability of a movement like community bio, if community bio is indeed a movement that purports to have a direction. And also some of the things that we talked about in the last session about the responsibility of people within community bio, like the responsibility of academics to communicate clearly the stakes and the aims of what it is that they're doing, without necessarily being concerned about alienating people within their own community. Does that follow? And
I mean, for me, I guess it follows. Like, I definitely understand what you're discussing, and I think that, yeah, there's thank you, Alex. Yes, it does follow. I think it's just a really hard discussion to have, because one of the things, and once again, I would love some community labs to kind of tell me that I'm being stupid or something, but one of the things that I notice is there's this distinct kind of generational gap that exists between the old guard of community labs. So like the people that initially founded them, they were a really tight, close-knit network that were kind of brought together by, their innovation and their desire to grow these spaces, and the kind of like punky countercultural elements that they kind of viewed themselves as. But I conducted a fair number of interviews, and the interesting thing that I noticed was the old guard know each other. Everybody knows each other. Everybody talks to each other. There's like a monthly call, all of this stuff. The children don't know. Like the ones that have just been in the community lab scene for maybe like a year or two, they're not connected to the broader community as the old guard are. So it's a very interesting kind of juxtaposition where I think there might be potentially much more cohesion with, the original founders and the like. And then, like newer participants tend to be a little bit more like willing to be fragmented because they don't have the broader knowledge base. And so in some ways it might be harder just to generate any sort of like shared culture or things along those lines, just because they're not connected at all in any way similar to the way that the first generation was connected.
Is it okay to chime in?
Yes, please. Dan?
I think between old and new generation, even in the old generation, I don't think we saw eye to eye on everything and still don't. I think there's ways to make associations within the different groups about things that you will and won't do, and basically almost have subgroups that agree to some sets of rules about self-experimentation, working with BSL1, BSL2, things of that nature, where if you sign into that group, you're basically owning into those rules. And so then what you have are basically sub-communities within the DIY bio scene where you know what you're actually signing on to. So, when I end up talking to the media or talking to other folks within the community about my sets of beliefs, often I'm put in a position where I need to talk about others in the community that are doing self-experimentation. And then there's a question of, well, who's actually representing the community? Mm-hmm. Is it them? Is it me? And so on and so forth. Whereas if you said, well, there are elements of folks in the community that do X, Y, and Z, but, we're part of a group that doesn't, or we're part of a group that does, A, B, and C, it helps with the differentiation. And so I really believe in basically creating consortia, associations, agreeing to sets of rules, which will help everyone tremendously. Because otherwise we're all in the same bucket together. What someone does, in their basement with a syringe ends up being something that I need to defend or have to explain to the media or to people from outside the community. And that puts me in a very difficult position. It puts us in a very difficult position. So I think there are ways to basically differentiate. Is this something I've implemented? No, but
Dan's looking for a victim to implement it.
I mean, so part of the reason why this Bio Summit 4.0 is so important for me and a lot of the people that I've been working with for years is because we do really want to put in some sort of governance structure, create some sort of association of labs or practitioners that sign on to some sort of shared sets of rules. We've spent the last 3 years putting together a community biosafety handbook. If you look at it, it's in the Slack. You can check out the link. You'll see that it was put together by a group of people who have been doing this for some of us over 10 years. And it's more than just, biosafety. It's about how to run a lab, how to work together as a group, how to really, do outreach, do all kinds of different activities that are specific to our community. And some of the questions that we've maybe left more open are these more controversial questions, because I think it's something that we as a community need to grapple with. So the answer is no, we haven't implemented, but yes, this is a perfect opportunity for us to really work on this as a community.
And I think Dan's also underselling the amount of work that he's put in, because he has done things like, getting biosafety fellows into community labs to try to understand community lab culture with funding from Open Philanthropy. He has, with Todd, put together a really incredible 3-day biosafety workshop for community lab participants, biohackers, a broad plethora of community members. So, it's partial, the work that he's been doing and others like him have been doing, I think are potential stepping stones that could be leveraged to kind of generate that vision that he's discussing about kind of, associations and kind of almost kind of like a guild like concept. So, you know, I think that that's a very interesting, that's definitely one interesting approach that could be taken for like a governance structure. Yeah, that's the $64,000 question. So Anthony asked a really good question, which is, with governance structures that aim to be comprehensive, like how will it treat people that kind of are on the periphery? And yeah, that's a great question. I mean, put it out there. Anyone have any thoughts? Oh.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this for a long time. I think one idea is to create an association where people voluntarily sign up to be part of that association. We, as an association, agree to some set of rules and ethics, and then it's up to you as an individual or as a community lab to become part of that association. And my hope is with an association like this is that it would work both upwards and downwards, meaning that the folks who are running the association would then be empowered to say, hey, look, we're a global association. We have labs around the world. We would like to apply for funding from NSF, NIH, whatever body that has funding, and then act as a national organization to basically essentially send funds down the line to individuals or individual labs that would be participating in either a project or just an overall education mission. So I think there's a lot of benefits to joining or creating some sort of association where there are agreed upon rules. There's an agreed upon, for lack of a better word, political structure, where the labs basically every couple of years vote in the leadership or the executive director or whatever it is, and then basically have representation in a larger body. I think in some sense, BioSummit does that, but none of it is formalized. And I think if it were formalized, we would have a lot more ability to do a lot more basically between a large institutional structure and then individual labs.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting connections between what you're saying and some of the things that, certainly Anthony's question you were answering, and also what Yang Bi was saying earlier, is there's this formalization of institutions and this idea that like structures are a dirty word, while at the same time community bio is like, working with questions of governance, right? Like there's still so much anti-institutionalism baked into community bio that I think it manifests sort of strangely, at least in my view, in this like, we're going to make structures, but we're going to like make sort of impermanent sandcastle-y structures that are flexible and we can like use them as we want to. And like, like the statement of purpose is a draft, right? It's, but it's been the same draft since we created it at the second BioSummit. The ethics document is a list of questions that was supposed to be, at least the intent at the time, as I understood it, as someone who was in the room for the hours when it was, being compiled and produced, was, that there were supposed to be people answering those questions and beginning to form the sorts of, boxes or whatever sort of structural analogies we want to use to say like, these are our beliefs, these are our values, this is how it might differ from other people within the community, but some, fostering some clarity around that. And there's just kind of like a tendency to like roll with the ambiguity of it all, to keep building the airplane while you're flying it, and to never, like have something concrete or permanent.
I love the idea of associations. Here in Nigeria, associations play a major role. Associations from market women, even in the church. our governance is really about associations. Associations will enable, if there are associations or community development and they are made formal, just the way Charles said, I think it's a good, it's a bargaining power. You know, the community labs can speak with one voice. At times, even the community labs can tax themselves, like they can have levies in the sense that they will use it to buy equipment for some other labs. It will be like an association that will screen other labs, maybe let me use the word counterfeit or quacks from coming in. With that formal association, you can actually, implement the ethics. I read the ethics document about ethics document. So it's only if you're in that association, you can operate. It might be like a cartel, but it would be a very good tool. I think that the formalization of association, a global association of a registered association. So as Chad says, so there's something like that here about something, but it's not informal. People come in and leave. Or associations are a very good tool, to get a lot of work done.
No, absolutely, Ola. That's a very good point. And, I think all of these conversations eventually kind of, for me, they've been converging on the desirability and the work necessary and the implications of formalization and legitimacy, like the relationship between those two kinds of concepts. And I think that's a really interesting place to kind of leave this conversation for the time being. Obviously, we can continue this conversation on the Slack in the governance track. I just really want to thank Andy and the rest of the group for Open Insulin for Society for participating and being a part of this, and presenting a really thought-provoking question for us all to consider. Major snaps, if people are in the mood. Absolutely, just absolutely amazing.